All right, let's see how smart you are. If a plane crashes on the border of the US and Canada, where do they bury the survivors? So if you're still thinking about that, I just got you. There's not much thinking to do. If there's a plane crash and there's survivors, there's no one to bury. See, when you're used to being the smart one, your brain just jumps to solving problems, even when the answer is right in front of your face. And if you were a gifted kid, this might be an experience that you've had over and over and over again. So me being a kid that could read at 2, I could do multiplication in the 1st grade. I was regularly in classes that were 2-3 years ahead of me. In kindergarten, I was sitting in class with the 2nd and 3rd graders. My identity became life is easy, school is easy, life is easy, homework is easy, and low-key, I might be the chosen one. So a lot of times people were looking at me like I had all the answers. Every time the teacher would ask a question, everybody would be expecting me to say the answer, and a lot of times I did know the answer. It got so bad that sometimes even adults would come to me with problems that I had no idea how to solve because I was a kid, like life problems that I had no idea how to solve just because they thought I was so smart. But here's when you run into an issue: when intelligence and excellence and perfection becomes your entire self-worth. Whenever you don't hit that perfect score, everything feels like a failure. So throughout elementary school, as I said, everything was really easy. I had pretty much the equivalence of all 100%. So I mean, we had 1s to 4s, I all had 4s. Everything was so easy. Then for middle school, I got into the best middle school in the city, and there were other smart kids there. I mean, don't get me wrong. They were really smart and they were getting things done and they had high grades. But at the end of the day, I'm thinking like they actually had to study. Like they actually had to study to get their grades. Like I'm just kind of chilling here and I'm not that far behind them. My whole identity became, if you have to try hard to get grades, you just aren't that smart. Well, guess what? That overconfidence ended up making me my first year in middle school getting my first C-, my first score that wasn't, on a 1 to 4 scale, that wasn't a 4. So this is just vintage Dunning-Kruger effect where you just overestimate your ability. And when you're young and successful, you've never really experienced a time where you weren't able to be on top of everything. So everything just intensifies on top of each other at that point because all you've known is easy, not just success, not success you had to work hard for, but easy success. So tell me if this resonates with you. You were the kid who was a smart kid, who was the gifted kid, who was in all the honors classes and everybody thought was so smart. At the end of the day, you were still a kid. So when you did run into roadblocks, you didn't know how to ask for help because you're used to knowing everything. And then you start to realize that you're kind of on your own because the teachers are focusing on the kids who are struggling in class. And then everybody in your class starts to kind of say, I can't get an answer in because every time the teacher asks a question, this guy knows the answer, or this girl knows the answer, or this person knows the answer, and I can't even get my answers in. So people just start to look at you crazy. They start to be upset because you did well on a test. And I really started to dumb myself down. I would start to pretend like I didn't know the answer. I would have people that were looking over my shoulder trying to copy my test, and I was really a crash out. I was a crash out in middle school and in high school. I would fail a test on purpose if someone was looking over my shoulder. Like I know some people are mad. Some people probably had this done to them, but I was just like, you really are going to look over my shoulder and get free answers? We're going to fail this test together. So sometimes I would do that. So like I said, the result of this was I never really asked for help because I never had to ask for help as a young kid. And then when I started to need help, once I got to middle school or high school, even college, once I started to need help with things, I didn't know how to ask for help. I didn't ask for help because, again, I was thinking in my psyche, I'm thinking like, if I need help, then it's beyond me. There's no point in even doing it. When I tell you that I never studied a day in middle school and high school, and I didn't study for college until like 2-3 years in. So let's build on that. What is that called? That's called learned helplessness. That means that everything was easy for so long that when you finally fail, you're like, oh, I'm not smart anymore. Like I must have lost some brain cells these last couple of years because this was all easy before. And this is even after failing something once, like having a struggle with something once. But that's not really true. I didn't really get dumber. I just didn't do what everybody else did. Like I would see the other kids that were in the honors classes that I was in, and I would see that they were studying, and I was like, I don't need to do that. Like there's no point in studying. And they would be studying and they would be working hard and they would get good grades, and then I would get like a C plus or a B or something that wasn't as well as I could have done if I could go back in time and actually study for those things. I didn't know the concept of what grinding to get a good grade was, because the challenges at that point that I had faced in my academic career was I'm learning something, this is really hard, and then 10 minutes later I understand it. Like 10 minutes later I completely understand it, and I can just kind of coast through until like we figure out what's next. I literally was in my first grade class begging my teacher, like, I already learned times tables by myself. Can we please go over times tables? I asked my teacher that like they were going to change the curriculum the entire year, and spoiler, we never did it in class. But again, I was so used to being able to learn things so quickly that when I didn't learn things quickly, I just thought there was no point in really attacking it because that's just not something I'm good at. And then I started to kind of think about what made me so good at school anyway. Now, what made me good at school was I kind of had a natural inclination for being good at school and learning things pretty quickly. But what really made me good at school is because I was interested in school and school topics outside of school. I was interested in multiplication outside of school. I was reading like 50 books every week. Shout out to Cat Williams. He had people thinking he was lying, but listen, you can really read a bunch of books every week. If you go to that library, you read 2-3 books in there, you leave with a bag of books and you just sit there and read. Like, so technically I was kind of studying as a younger kid. And then when you figure out things like, you know, video games and computer games and all these other things that are much more entertaining than cracking open a book, then you're like, you know, I kind of want to spend time just having fun and not just studying and reading all the time. So when things came easy to me, like classes came easy to me, like algebra, I absolutely loved it. So is being a gifted kid really even a thing? Is it just that some kids have an inclination to want to read and write and do math outside of class, and therefore they just do better in school and everyone thinks that they're a genius and they have an IQ? Or is it that's just some kids never really even have interest in school and they just do well, just regardless? And we've seen people on both sides, but I think there may be a little bit of mix. I think some of the gifted kids may just be kids that love school. Some of the gifted kids may just be like, you know, top 0.00003% of the entire human population of all time, where they just don't even care about anything at school, yet they can just constantly just do well without any effort. A lot of things can happen. You can become a burnt out adult, which I saw that trending a couple of years ago, where you're a burnt out gifted kid and you know you're kind of struggling as an adult adjusting to that. And then you have adults that continue to be gifted and they like go to Harvard and they work at the most prestigious companies in the world and they just are gifted their entire life. They're just gifted. Now me, I'm somewhere kind of in the middle. Like I said, I didn't study all the way through high school. I didn't study in middle school. I didn't study most of college, but I did study my last couple years of college. And then I did study in my graduate programs. So the big shift goes from I'm smart to this is something that I'm learning. You know, this is a skill that I'm learning that I value. There's a quote that Kevin Durant said that he got from somebody else that said, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. And that's just so true. It's just so true. When talent works hard, hard work alone cannot beat talent. So just because you're smart doesn't mean that you should just get an A every single time just because you're smart. Just because you're tall doesn't mean that you should just make the basketball team. You actually have to try. You actually have to work at something before you can just claim it as something that is yours. And when you do run into those first big obstacles or next big obstacle, you have to learn how to ask for help. So my journey of being a slightly above average to kind of average student for a little bit of middle school and most of high school, it didn't really end until I started just asking professors for help in college. Like I would have like average grades in college in a class, and then I would go in and meet with the professor and then everything would click and I would have like a 98%. So I promise you, a lot of times it's just asking for help. It's just asking for help. And I know a lot of times we run into situations where we don't want to ask for help because it's embarrassing, because we should just know it. But actually asking for help, especially in a school setting or any setting, it can actually be the key to you just being just as amazing as you were when you were a kid. So there are two sides to the coin of being a gifted kid. The first is things might start off easy to you. And then the second thing is, it's a trap. You can go on autopilot and you can become very ordinary. But whenever you get yourself out of that rut and you start to really work hard and focus on your true potential, that's when success is really going to start happening. So a good bulk of my 20s have been adjusting to this new way of thinking, and it's always a really bumpy road. So if you want a little bit of insight about how I attack my 20s, go ahead and click this video here.